and then maybe we can have more of a conversation and we can share information. So, yeah, I'm the manager of the Housing and Community Services Division. We're 20 people, but we do a range of things from a Youth Works program to administering the city's relocation ordinance to administering federal funding for community facility improvements, shelter plus care, affordable housing development. So we do a really broad range of things with a really small but mighty staff, and I just wanted to appreciate them because we do a lot. So just to go into a brief overview in terms of the data I have up on this slide is from the last, what we call the point-in-time count. So every 2 years, Alameda County does a count of homeless folks throughout the county, and the city of Berkeley pays a little bit extra to have data specific to the city of Berkeley. So in January of 2017, the count revealed that we have 972 people on our streets. Now that's point in time, and so what that means is that over the course of the year, the usual sort of multiplier that you put on that is basically maybe doubling that. So I would say over the course of the year, we probably have around 2,000 people that are homeless in Berkeley. So as you can see also from the slide, homelessness is up. That's no surprise to anyone in this room, I'm sure, because I think we see that, we feel it in Berkeley, and it's gained a lot of urgency, especially with council and with the city recently. And part of the issue is that 68% of our population is unsheltered, meaning living on the streets, living in cars. So that's a lot of people that we have living outside that have needs. So as part of the homeless count, they also did some surveys of homeless people and asked some questions about why are you homeless? So what was reported, self-reported by the people who were asked questions is that it's really about, money. I don't have enough money. Not enough housing is available. Some people reported mental health and substance use issues. And contrary to what some people say, well, homeless people in encampments just don't want housing, 97% of the folks in Berkeley said, no, I really want housing, it's just not available to me.
Excuse me, if there were two or more reasons, you just report that it was just one reported or registered?
No, you could report multiple reasons.
Okay.
So, yeah. And if anyone's interested in the data, I have cards and I can certainly, provide people with a report from the homeless count. So this slide just gives a basic overview of how the city is spending funds on homelessness. Now this is funding that my division also administers funding to over 50 nonprofits, which include about 16 homeless agencies. So this chart includes funding that goes out to those agencies, those nonprofits, and it also includes the HOT team, which I'll talk about in a second. So basically, we spend about $4.8 million each year in funding homeless programs. At the top of the list is the Hub, which I'll talk about in the next slide in a little bit more detail. We also fund drop-in centers. That's the MASC at 1931 Center Street, Berkeley Drop-In Center on Adeline, Women's Daytime Drop-In Center on Acton. We fund shelters. We have 4 shelters with approximately 160 beds. That's not including the year-round, well, what used to be the winter shelter is now expanded shelter. So the expanded winter shelter is 52 beds, as you can see there. And that was a shelter that used to be provided just on during inclement weather and has been expanded by council to be basically, now it's looking like it might be year-round. And that has moved recently to the basement of 1931 Center Street. We also fund transitional housing. We fund housing case management, so that we have federal resources to provide housing subsidies for people. And then we use local city dollars to provide the case management that's needed to help keep people in housing, get them housed and keep people in housing. We have what's called the HOT team, which I'll go into also a little bit more in depth later. And the HOT team has two people who are downstairs on the 3rd floor and would be happy to talk to folks about, more about what they do. And then we fund a variety of medical care, alcohol and drug treatment, benefits advocacy. So the Homeless Action Center is one of those agencies that we fund. Meals, showers, and very newly locker program.
Question?
4.8 million, yes.
What's the difference in transitional housing versus other housing?
So transitional housing is typically time limited around 2 years, and it basically provides you with a place to live for about 2 years with the goal of transitioning you to permanent housing. Shelter has in the past been more time limited, although now shelter beds you're able to stay there for an unlimited period of time. But that's the main difference.
So there's a different sort of kind of weeding process in who can access.
Well, we'll talk about that too in a second, because now that Berkeley has shifted to a coordinated entry system, basically the front door into all of those programs is no longer with each individual program. It is through one front door, which is located at the hub. So I'll talk about that
I have a question
in a
as
sec.
well. Supposedly in January, the women's transitional is supposed to end. So is that part of that 57 single adults, or is
No.
that without it?
That is without that.
Okay.
Yeah. And that program did close already.
So does, what do women do with any transitional?
So women can also access the shelter beds that we have, and if women are accompanied by children, they can access the family transitional housing that exists as well.
I just, it's hard to hold down a full-time job and you're kicked out on your days off and have to stay out all day. Usually, especially people that work in a week, there's at least one day a week that they do laundry and prepare for the next week. And so that's not a good way to get people into that other position where they're self-sufficient.
Yes.
It's impossible.
Yeah, very true. I mean, I think what the speaker is referring to is, a lot of programs, basically because they are not funded at the level that they need to be funded to stay open 24 hours. So some of the transitional housing programs closed during the day and only had staff in the evenings and overnight, and shelters closed during the day. So that's a problem of resources. We just don't have enough resources in the system to be
Along with
able
holidays.
to fund them, to keep them open 24/7.
Does this include pathways?
Pathways is an exception, and we will talk about that in a second. So Pathways, yes, I'll come to that, which is a 24/7 program. So,
And one more question, is the women's shelter on Dwight, is that still open?
yes,
There's people still in there. There
How
are
is
second
that
floor.
funded? Was that part of that?
yes, it was. Let's see if I can get back to it. So it's in the year-round shelter beds. So that's 718-125 includes funding for the women's shelter. So yes, okay, so let me just clarify that. Berkeley Food and Housing Project operates a men's shelter that up until a couple of weeks ago was located in the basement of 1931 Center Street. That shelter has now moved to 2140 Dwight Way, which is where Berkeley Food and Housing Project's women's shelter is also located. So they closed the transitional housing program. They lost HUD funding for that program, and that closed. And they shifted the women's shelter, I believe, to the 3rd floor where the transitional housing was. They're shifting the men's transitional housing program that's funded for veterans to the 2nd floor, and they're putting the men's shelter on the 1st floor. So that change happened fairly recently, and that's So now all of that is located at 2140 White Way. Okay. So not only do we invest local funds, but we also do invest, we administer federal funding and state funding for homeless programs. So federal funding is $5.9 million, and this is primarily our Shelter Plus Care program. So that is also located in my unit, and we fund approximately 260 subsidies. Now these are housing subsidies that people can use in any private apartment. So you need to work with the case manager to find a landlord who will accept the subsidy, and then we pay the Shelter Plus Care program pays the subsidy, and it's permanent. And we also fund the support services that go along with that subsidy. So we're able to house about 260 people there. And then we administer state and county funding. Now, some county funding, the $1.5 million is relatively new county funding that started last year that is going to support the hub that I'll talk about in just a minute and a little bit more in detail. So that's an effort to bolster the front door, the hub, into our homeless services in Berkeley. So we got some county funding for that. We're also looking forward to getting some more resources through the state that will assist us in expanding some of our emergency homeless services, and I'll come to that in more detail in a second. So we also have $300,000 to support the Pathways Stair Center. So Pathways Stair Center is the new shelter that's basically located on 2nd Street between Cedar and Virginia. It's operated by a nonprofit agency called BACS. We call it a navigation center, which is a model that we borrowed from San Francisco. So it's a shelter that's basically 24/7. So unlike our existing shelters, it is funded to provide 24/7 services. And it's a low barrier program where people can come in with possessions, with their pets. You can, if you have a partner, you can sleep next to your partner instead of being separated from them. And it's got sufficient services to really support people for a 24/7 program. It also has rapid rehousing subsidies. So let me explain rapid rehousing a little bit. These are subsidies that are similar to Shelter Plus Care in that it's subsidies that help people pay the rent for a limited amount of time. So it can provide you with a security deposit, first month's rent, and then support you in housing for several months depending on your need, while you get up to the point where you can take over the rent. So it's funding that helps get you rapidly rehoused, provides support for a relatively short amount of time, and then assumes that you can take over the rent in future. So the Stair Center, Pathways Stair, has those rapid rehousing resources, and that's through the county of Alameda, to be able to get people housed quickly. So this is an attempt to kind of illustrate our new-ish coordinated entry system. So we shifted to the system in January of 2016. We were a little bit ahead of the curve, as Berkeley always likes to be ahead of the curve, in the county at starting a coordinated entry system. Unfortunately, it's kind of born out of a lack of sufficient resources to help every single person in Berkeley. So because we don't have sufficient resources, we really have to think about prioritizing our resources for those people that are least able to navigate the system on their own and get housing on their own and resolve their homelessness on their own. So that's why we have the coordinated entry system. It's also a mandate for our HUD funding that we participate in coordinated entry, and it's a best practice across the nation. So what we're trying to do, welcome, come on in, is prioritize our scarce resources and utilize them in a way that we're trying to help those who are least able to help themselves. So basically, the process is that people are assessed through what we call the hub. So Berkeley Food and Housing Project operates this single point of entry to our homeless system. And what they do is they accommodate people who call in, people who walk in, and they have an outreach team that goes out into the community and works with people in encampments to get them an assessment. So the assessment enables us, and it's a tool that's used across the county, and it's also required by HUD, by the way. The assessment allows us to really determine what the needs of the people that we're serving are. And it creates basically an assessment of how vulnerable are you, and it helps us determine which people we will help first. And so the hub staff are mandated to help the hardest, the people with the highest needs and the most vulnerabilities, and that could include mental health issues, physical health issues, other issues, not being able to maintain housing in the past. So those are the kinds of vulnerabilities that we're looking for, and the hub is helping people who have a lot of needs first, because we don't have enough resources to help everyone. So the hub is the kind of first point of entry into our system, and then the hub can place people into shelter, into transitional housing, and get people on the path towards permanent housing as well. And our permanent housing subsidies are coordinated countywide and go to the people who are the most vulnerable first. So that's kind of what it looks like.
And I have one question. Is there any way the community could advocate to get funding for women's transitional housing?
Sure.
I mean, it's just like a piece of the puzzle is gone for women that don't have children. And there are women that have experienced domestic violence in a very strong and serious manner that don't have any opportunity to move on.
Yeah, so the question is, how can we advocate for more money for women's transitional housing? One thing that I can say is that the city is going to be releasing a request for proposals in November for our community agency funding. It's not only homeless funding, but all the funding we put out to nonprofits. And that process takes from November through to June. It's pretty heavy, it's process oriented. But this is the time for people in the community to advocate for what you think should be funded. So in June, City Council will determine what the community agency funding will be for the next 4 years. So it's really a critical time. There are multiple public hearings in, April, May, and June for members of the community to go to these public hearings and tell council what you think should be funded. So just, keep on the watch for that.
If there's any way I can help out, I'd be willing to do so as a DV survivor.
So just want to point out that the city does provide funding for outreach, and want to make sure that everybody understands, what resources exist. So on this slide, you have contact information for the city's mobile crisis team. So that's, when you encounter someone anywhere, actually, it doesn't have to be a homeless person. Mobile crisis does not just serve homeless people, it serves anyone in the Berkeley community. If you see anyone who appears to be in distress, suicide, other kind of serious mental illness issues, you can call the mobile crisis team at that number. It is only available from 11:30 a.m. to 10 p.m., but that's 7 days a week. So it's not 24/7, but 7 days a week during those hours. And then, as I mentioned before, we have the Homeless Outreach and Treatment Team called HOT. So the Homeless Outreach and Treatment Team is, I don't know if folks remember way back when. I've been at the city for quite a while now, so I remember when we used to have a HOT team in the past. And then those resources dwindled, but now it's built back up into a 4 to 5 person team that includes clinicians and a nurse. And the HOT team responds to community calls for, can someone go and help this person on the street? He's been camped there a long time and he looks like he needs some help. So the HOT is the city's way to send them out to engage in a conversation with a person in an encampment and try to get them linked into our coordinated entry system. The HOT, as I said, also has a nurse, so sometimes that's a really good way to engage people and services if we can address some immediate needs that they have, like physical needs. So the HOT is also linked up with the outreach team that the Berkeley Food and Housing Project has. So it's a great way to send the HOT out. They can communicate with the other outreach team that can come out to that individual, do an assessment of that person, and potentially even get them into shelter that same night. So as I mentioned before, shelter beds do go through the coordinated entry process. So long-term shelter beds are really trying to be reserved for those with the highest needs. But every night we have some shelter beds that go unfilled. So there is a number that you can call, and I think that's on the next slide. Yeah. Let's just go right to shelter. So there is a number that you can call to get into a one-night shelter, and then the idea is that you will also get an assessment and will be able to determine if you can stay in that shelter bed longer. So the main way of getting into the city's homeless system is by calling 211, which is a county-wide resource that helps triage people to the different coordinated entry systems throughout Alameda County. Berkeley is only one of, I think, 5 or 6 places throughout Alameda County that people can go to enter into the homeless systems throughout Alameda County. And we serve not only Berkeley, but we also partner with the cities of Albany and Emeryville. And it's our 3 cities that work together to get people into homeless services. Then there's another resource center in Oakland. There's a resource center for Oakland single individuals and then also for Oakland families. And we, the City of Berkeley partners with Oakland in terms of those family resources as well. So if you're a family in Berkeley, the Oakland Front Door for Families covers the cities of Berkeley, Albany, Emeryville for families, and Oakland. So you can call 211 to get an assessment. You can also walk into a couple of different places. One is the Berkeley Drop-In Center, and that's to get an assessment, and also they'll provide you with some assistance in trying to look for housing. And so that's available from 10:30 to noon on Tuesdays. And then on Thursdays in the afternoon, the hub is open to take anybody to walk in to get an assessment and to get, start getting into the homeless system. So this is just another slide that kind of reiterates that we do have a new navigation center. It's basically shelter that's open 24/7, and it's located on 2nd and Cedar. And again, there's outreach that's specifically designed to encourage people in encampments in Berkeley, all throughout Berkeley, with a focus on West Berkeley where it's located, to get people into the shelter there. And it also is targeting people who have high needs. So we're really trying to focus our limited resource on high needs folks. And this actually is more information about what services are available to you that day or that night. So this is where, when I mentioned we have some shelter beds that go unfilled every night, that's the number that you can call, 1-866-960-2132, to get a bed. And that's Monday through Friday, 7 to 8 p.m., and Saturday and Sunday, 2 to 3 p.m., to try to access any available shelter beds. And then we have, that's the information on our 3 drop-in centers that we have, that people can walk into and can get connected with the hub and get an assessment.
The women's daytime drop-in, is It's not closed on the first Friday of the month anymore.
It's not?
No.
Oh, okay. Okay, little update there. Women's Daytime Drop-In is now hopefully open the first Friday of the month, so maybe we could check that out with, I know they have
Seats right
a
upstairs.
table downstairs, yeah. That's great.
Or downstairs.
Just another new program that has recently started in Berkeley is a locker program. So council allocated $50,000 for a locker program fairly recently, and we have now contracted with Boss, who operates the Mask. That's the drop-in center in the basement of 1931 2nd Street, to operate these lockers. I think they have about 55 lockers, and people can access those lockers by going to the Mask and basically asking for one. It's just first come, first serve. If you need a locker and you're willing to just sign an agreement, you can have a locker. And so you can see the hours up there that the lockers are open. Just hoping to end on a positive note. As I've mentioned, we have limited resources, but we've been working really hard to try to increase the resources that we do have. I just want to do a shout out to City Council. They have really been investing more resources in homeless services. The Stair Center was one example of that, and the expansion of the Dorothy Day House winter storm shelter was another example of council basically allocating more money for homeless services. So that's really great. And while those efforts are wonderful, I want to just do a shout out to all the agencies that are working downstairs that have been doing really hard work over the many decades. I've been working on this a couple of decades myself now, to try to house people in Berkeley. And I don't want to, forget that these are really dedicated people who work really hard, and they don't get paid a lot to do what they do. And they work hard day in and day out to get each and every person into a better place. So, notwithstanding looking at outcomes and all of that, people work really hard, and I just want to appreciate that. We are, as I mentioned before, looking at some new funding that's coming from the state of California. The mayors of the 11 biggest cities in California lobbied the state recently to get some more money to address the immediate crisis of homelessness. And so money is coming back down to counties, basically, through the continuums of care in the form of this HEAP funding. HEAP stands for Homeless Emergency Assistance Program, I think. And so this funding, and it's a fairly big chunk of money. It's a $500 million block grant, and it's designed to provide direct aid to cities. But it's time limited. It's one-time funding, okay? So we in Alameda County stand to get about 16 million of those funds, and the city of Oakland is getting an additional 8 million of the state of California funds. And there's a public process kind of underway right now to determine how to use those funds. Since it's not ongoing, an ongoing resource, it's something that we're looking at to provide, better conditions for homeless people on the streets. We might be talking about additional porta potties. We might be talking about garbage pickup. We might be talking about funding some additional shelter resources. So those discussions are going on right now. And the funds have to be expended by June of 2021. So unfortunately, these resources are not designed to be like an ongoing source of permanent housing funding. But it's good news that we have a little bit of extra money to use for homeless programs. We also my division recently applied for an expansion of our Shelter Plus Care program, and we'll get between 40 and 50 new subsidy slots, which is honestly a drop in the bucket when you consider the need that's out there, but it's something, and we're really excited to have at least 50 new people be able to get housing. We also partnered with Berkeley Housing Authority to access some new Section 8 vouchers that the federal government, surprisingly, I don't know, made available to jurisdictions. So we're going to have about 30 new Section 8 subsidies specifically designed for homeless people or people who are imminently losing their housing. So that's a total of, 80 new subsidies. So it will help, but we really need more money to be able to tackle the crisis. And this is my final slide. It's just a link to the resources that I mentioned in my presentation are on the city's website. And I have a card here. I'm happy to answer any questions at any time. And we can also take questions now. Yes?
A few years ago, I tried to help someone who was homeless by calling that 211 number, and it was days on the phone in order to be able to be successful. Has that changed or gotten better?
I'm not sure that it's honestly gotten too much better in terms of the phone. I think what's most effective, to be honest with you, is assisting people to either go into the hub or calling the homeless outreach and treatment team, the HOT team, and having someone go out to do an assessment. So I think it's most effective to either go to the hub on that Thursday afternoon, go to the Berkeley Drop-In Center on, was it the Tuesday, or call the HOT for an assessment. The Homeless Outreach and Treatment Team, which is on one of the slides. Oh, and I forgot, I didn't have these handouts. So if you want the handouts, I can take your email and email the handouts to you. Let me go back. There's the HOT number, 981-5273. And again, they have a table downstairs on the 3rd floor, and they're two fantastic women that I've worked with for many years, and I'm sure they'd be happy to talk to you about what kind of services they can provide.
Thank you.
Yes, thank you so much. As you know, it is a complex landscape, and Kristen has done a wonderful job of breaking it down in quick time. If you want to get a copy of her presentation, just stop up here and leave your information and email address, something like that. I saw lots of you taking photographs of the screen, so I know there's big interest, so get your pen ready. And then another quick reminder that if you are not yet registered to vote and are looking for a resource, Julie from Consider the Homeless is here doing that for people who are housed and people who do not currently have housing, so just see her after that. And food and mingling and more information can you downstairs on the 3rd floor and at 1 back in this room for a Know Your Rights workshop presented by the Homeless Action Center.
Know your right to.
Know Your Rights. It's designed for people who are on the street and want information about their legal rights, or people who work with people who are on the streets and want to know their legal rights as unhoused people.
What time?
That starts at 1 right back here. Thank you.
Thank you.